Replacement theology advocates that the new covenant has superseded Israel's covenant, and hence the church has inherited God's promises to Abraham. All of Israel's covenants are not Old or Mosaic covenant or part of it. The irrevocable everlasting promises God made to Abraham and his descendants is called the Abrahamic covenant. God promised Abraham innumerable descendants, land as an everlasting possession, great personal, national, and universal blessings. The covenant is unilateral and unconditional in that it is binding on only God for its fulfillment, as only God passes between the animal pieces, putting Abraham into deep sleep. God reaffirms his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and establishes circumcision as the permanent sign for all male descendants. The Abrahamic covenant is a foundational covenant for God's ultimate redemptive purposes and thus includes the gospel promise, which extends to the church, fulfilled through the new covenant in Christ on faith alone. Paul explains that Jesus came to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant to bring the spiritual blessings to all nations. That even later Mosaic law cannot set aside God's duly established covenant, which is based solely on His grace. The Davidic covenant, which adds to the Abrahamic covenant, is a unilateral promise by God to King David that David's descendant will rule over Israel and all nations from Jerusalem forever, establishing Jesus as the promised eternal king. Though God made the temporary conditional Mosaic or Old Covenant to bless Israel if they kept the law and disciplined them, God also says He will not completely destroy them because of His promises to the patriarchs, even in case of Israel's rebellion and rejection of Christ. Hence, the promises are not to be forfeited by disobedience. Therefore, the land promise is permanent, and God's judgments of dispersions are only temporary dealings with respect to the land. As God clearly asserts that His covenants with Abraham and David are as secure as the day and night, that He will never cast Israel away, that they will be a nation before Him forever. The Abrahamic covenant will be fully realized at Christ's return, when Israel will be saved with new covenant blessings. God's oath to never break the Abrahamic covenant clearly tells us that the covenant is eternal, literal, and permanent and cannot be spiritualized but is to be fulfilled literally. The perpetual future of Israel as an eternal nation and their status as God's chosen people is rooted in the Abrahamic covenant, based solely on God's faithfulness and His oath sworn to the patriarchs. When God swears by Himself to never break His promises to Israel, why would He change His mind? Can God lie? When God will not make the everlasting new covenant in Christ invalid, why would He make the everlasting Abrahamic covenant invalid? If God cancelled His covenant with Abraham, how can the gospel promise, which is part of the covenant, be in effect? Where will Jesus step when He returns if God cancels Israel's national promises?